Good evening, America. It is 7 p.m. Thursday, August 6th, and this is Queer News Tonight, the world's first live LGBTQ daily evening news. It is time to queer up the news.
Watch as we bring you these and other stories from the LGBTQ headlines. We bring you a special whistleblower report about Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital to close tonight's show. And we will be unveiling who we are to endorse for vice president after our opening.
The gay husband of a fallen ICU doctor responds to Trump's "it is what it is." And it has been revealed that the Matrix was a trans allegory all along.
And then tonight, Thursday, 8 p.m., Gay Town Hall's amazingly diverse cast from around the LGBTQ community discusses the future of big tech and how our LGBT lives will continue to be shaped by it. So good evening, America. It is 7 p.m. Thursday, August 6, 2020, and it is time to queer up the news. We are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. So many of your stories we are going to tell this evening on Queer News Tonight. Tonight on the world's first live daily queer evening news show.
Tonight's news about the gay community and the news from an LGBTQ perspective. Are our gay stories important to you? In headlines, politics, entertainment, gay culture, travel, religion, and more. Reported by respected anchors.
Out of the closet and into the headlines on Q News Tonight. Thank you for joining Queer News Tonight. We are live, and this is an unedited news show, as you learned last night, by the way. So anything can happen, and this evening we bring you the news of and a perspective from the LGBTQ community. I'm your anchor, Al Ferguson, and this is my co-anchor, Aaron Darr, and Misty Eyes. So let's queer up the news.
Queer News Tonight's vice presidential endorsement. Freedom, truth, justice, and democracy. These are just some of the issues on the ballot in 2020. In January of 2019, I joined the National Finance Committee of For the People, the presidential campaign of United States Senator Kamala Harris, a campaign that was supposed to heal the end of what could have been in 2016. I desperately wanted to see a woman president. Not just any woman. Someone who I knew could win. Someone who was ready to lead. Someone who could prosecute the case against Donald Trump to the American people as to why he does not deserve another 4 years as president. A campaign that political pundits had dubbed would become a contest between Biden and Harris. I was heartbroken when she dropped out. So I moved on to another candidate, United States Senator from Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar. Again, someone who I knew was ready to be president on day one, could win and restore faith in American democracy both at home and abroad. To be honest, Vice President Biden was one of my last choices. Not because he was a man, but because I believed it was time for Democrats to look forward and pick from a new pool of talent that was pragmatically progressive and would excite the electorate, which is exactly what Joe Biden is doing today. He's looking forward with progressive policies tackling climate justice, economic justice, healthcare justice, and so much more. Yes, justice is on the ballot in 2020. There is so much at stake in the election on November 3rd, 2020. This nation needs a president, a vice president, who are ready to lead and fix what is now broken thanks to the Trump administration and the Republican Party. Everyday Americans are hurting. A pandemic that has put millions of people out of work and killed hundreds of thousands. Unemployment that is virtually now non-existent for so many. Seniors barely able to get by, skipping meds every other day because they don't have enough money to fill a script, let alone a copay for a doctor. American families and children being forced from their homes, now living on the streets because they have lost their jobs at no fault of their own. And our veterans. our veterans who have seen their health care and their benefits cut by Senate Republicans and Mitch McConnell. Republicans were given a chance, but they have failed. Now, together, we must move forward. My greatest hope is that Joe Biden will fix and build back America better than the 4 years of Donald Trump and Republican rule that have failed America's children and have failed America's working families. I believe that people are called to serve in the time they are meant to serve. Kamala Harris is the vice president that we need. From requiring California courts to implement marriage equality all across California as Attorney General, to implementing criminal and social justice reforms throughout California as Attorney General, Kamala Harris's experiences prepare her to step into the role as vice president. Now, 2020, race riots, inequalities, and so much pain. We need someone who has lived and knows these experiences firsthand as someone who is different. Kamala Harris is different. Kamala Harris is just like us, the LGBTQ community. Not because she's a Democrat, but because she knows what it's like to be counted out. She knows what it's like to be knocked down and told to wait her turn simply because she is not the norm, and neither are we. She knows what it's like to have her human rights up for debate simply because she is a woman, but also a woman of color. LGBTQ America, Kamala Harris is us, and we are her. Joe Biden, I ask that you select Kamala Harris as your vice president. We need someone who understands the hurt in America. We need someone who is ready, prepared, and understands the duties and responsibilities associated with the office of the President of the United States. America needs Kamala Harris, and that is why Queer News Tonight and Happening Out Television Network wholeheartedly endorse Kamala Harris to become the next Vice President of the United States of America.
Aaron, so well said. Tonight, we are going to begin Queer News Tonight with our queer headlines. The LGBTQ community in America is diverse. The LGBTQ community around the world is vast, and we bring you the bullet points of queer news for today, Thursday, August 6th, 2020. We begin by queering up the USA in reporting a gay husband of the fallen ICU doctor responds to Trump's "It is what it is." Watch this.
I mean, to your point, so many people did not have the privilege that I had. And I cannot imagine going through what I went through and not being able to be in the room.
David Hart's husband of 28 years, Dr. Joseph Costa, died in his arms after working on the front line of treating COVID-19 patients. And now he has a response to President Trump's recent declaration, "It is what it is," regarding the high mortality rate in the United States from the deadly virus. He said, quote, "Can you imagine if my husband, Joe, walked into a room of COVID patients and said, 'Oh, it is what it is,' and just shoved their beds into the corner and walked out?" Hart told Anderson Cooper in the Tuesday broadcast of the gay anchor's CNN program, "It is hard to imagine someone who chose to work in the medical profession would ever do that. And LGBTQ America, it has never been more clear the disconnect that is going on between us and the President of the United States."
I think myself, like many people all across our country right now, are in disbelief, not just because of the virus and the pandemic, but the lack of leadership that we see coming out of the White House, the lack and the denial of science and medicine, and people with the backgrounds necessary to be able to combat the transmission and contraction of coronavirus. Donald Trump might say it is what it is, but I say we must vote him out on November 3rd, 2020.
Retweet. I definitely think we need to vote him out. And also, it's really disgusting, and it's a sign that he's tossing in the towel and or giving up. He has no care in the world. It doesn't apply to, it is what it is. That's his sign of saying, I don't care.
LGBTQ America, we just want to tell you that our heart goes out to you. for the interview that you did with Anderson Cooper. How brilliant the interview was. And America, LGBT America, we want to draw attention that at the bottom of this broadcast, we are going to take our story here a step farther and show you what is going on in major hospitals in terms of what is happening to our healthcare workers. And our Florida governor and the CEO of a major healthcare system and what actually is happening. It is a vitally important interview, and we encourage you to watch.
Next, we queer up entertainment. The Matrix was a trans allegory the entire time, confirms co-creator Lilly Wachowski. Watch this.
Hello, Lilly Wachowski here. I'm glad that people are talking about the movies, the Matrix movies, with a trans narrative. I love that how meaningful those films are to trans people, and the way that they come up to me and say, these movies saved my life. Because when you talk about transformation, specifically in the world of science fiction, which is just about imagination, it's like, and world building, and like the idea of the seemingly impossible becoming possible, I think is like, that's why it speaks to them so much. And I'm grateful that I can be a part, throwing them a rope to help them along their journey.
In 1999, an ad campaign for a mysterious new movie asked, "What is the Matrix?" 21 years later, creator Lilly Wachowski is confirming it's much more than anyone could have imagined. In a video for Netflix, Lilly Wachowski, who co-directed the science fiction franchise with her sister Lana, confirmed that The Matrix is a trans allegory. "I'm glad that it has gotten out that it was the original intention," Wachowski said, adding, "The corporate world was not ready for it." The Wachowski's franchise has earned more than $1.5 billion worldwide, with a fourth movie due out in 2020.
Well, an amazing admission. I'm glad it is out now. I'm thrilled that there was a new movie coming, and I have lived frequently in the allegory story of choose the red pill or the blue pill. I always choose the red pill. I wonder what that says about my interest in trans.
All this talk of pills, are we talking about The Matrix or The Wizard of Oz? Yeah. Come on. But all jokes aside, this movie came out in 1999. I've totally never seen it. I must have been way too busy as a little gay child in Ohio dancing around to this one beautiful song called Hit Me Baby One More Time.
Oh my God, you are Britney Spears. But you know what's funny? As a trans person, I often associate mini plots and mini storylines with, like even Moana, like, oh my gosh, she was trans and she was dealing with her gender identity, and her grandmother's like, go, and her parents are like, no, you can't do this, and this is not for you, and be a girl, and she's like, blah, blah, blah. I never in a million years would have ever thought The Matrix was another allegory for transgender.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, America, let's catch up on all the news surrounding COVID-19 with our segment we call Quarantine Quickies. The first story tonight is our daily reporting of the coronavirus facts, especially important to the LGBTQ community. First, we report on our coronavirus case numbers. Based on the standard acceptance of 7% of the population is LGBTQ community, the world's LGBTQ COVID-19 cases stand at 1,333,795, while America's LGBT COVID-19 cases stand at an incredible 157,138. We remind you and try to educate the president for the last 6 months that America is ground zero of this pandemic. And that means that the USA's population is just 4.4% of the world, and today America is 26.2% of the world's cases. It's simple math. Next, we report on coronavirus deaths. The world's LGBTQ COVID-19 deaths stand at this threshold of nearly 50,000 worldwide, while America's LGBTQ COVID-19 deaths stand at 11,323. The USA is 22.7% of all of the deaths on this planet.
Next up in Quarantine Quickies, Trump on continued coronavirus cases and deaths. Things go away. Watch this.
Sir, you said in an interview this morning on the coronavirus, this thing's going away. It will go away like things go away, despite ongoing cases and death. Isn't that playing a lot of reality?
It's going away now. It'll go away like things go away.
President Trump repeated Wednesday that coronavirus will go away when asked about making that continued claim about the coronavirus despite ongoing additional cases and deaths. Trump repeated the assertion when asked whether his words during a Fox and Friends interview earlier in the day, saying, "This thing's going away. It will go away like things go away." And it's way out of touch with reality. What followed was what seemed to be the president rambling and repeating himself quite a few times about it going away before ending the comments with an odd remark of hopefully sooner rather than later. It's clear that the president is relying more on hope, imagine that, and less on scientific evidence by making comments like these.
You know, it's funny. Every time he speaks, I think he just gets smarter and smarter.
The sun is shining. The sun is shining. Did y'all know the sun is shining?
If you repeat it enough, you'll start believing it yourself.
I have to say this because every night being here, just being back this week, when I see the death toll continue to rise and the case numbers continue to rise in America, I think that voters need to remember this election. We need to look at it like this. This is almost like a 9/11 every day. A 9/11 every day. Remember that on November 3rd.
Yeah.
And tonight, as always, we are broadcasting from our studio set in the middle of the World AIDS Museum and Educational Center. As always, this museum is in Wilton Manors in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
We joke. We're coming from the gayest place on planet Earth.
We end, by the way, speaking of that, the first week of Aaron Dar being back after 4 months of quarantine.
I'm back.
At Wilton Manors in Fort Lauderdale and the World AIDS Museum and Educational Center and Queer News Tonight became the gayest it's ever become. We'd like to also thank our set designer, but welcome back, Aaron. You've been a nice breath of fresh air. We'd like to thank our set designer, Concepto Modern Living, here in Fort Lauderdale for making this set in this living museum possible. Now we end tonight's broadcast with The Big Finish. Short story mentions of LGBTQ news or news with a gay perspective. So here we go. First on Queer News Tonight's The Big Finish. John Waters doesn't think gay people can whistle.
Well, his thinking is correct. I'll tell you, as someone who's gay as the day is long and grew up listening to Ethel Merman recordings, I can't whistle for the life of me.
See, Waters was right.
How can this be news, first of all? And how can one ponder these thoughts when I know tons of gays that can whistle really loud, and some of them are coaches?
Ooh.
I think we can whistle just fine. But in Mr. Waters' case, I think the men around him are probably too busy doing other things with their mouth for him to realize this. And that's why Mr. Waters is confused. The Big Finish. Marvel makes history with first ever same-sex wedding between gay superhero power couple.
I think this is wonderful. It's so important that LGBT is represented all across any platform and media.
When I saw this on tonight's docket, I was super excited and I thought it was a movie. And I was like, yes! Then I Googled and found out it was a Marvel comic book. But I will say Marvel series and comics have featured many same-sex weddings, but this one is super special because it actually involves two of the superheroes.
You know, Misty, my friend Napoleon Plays would make fun of me at this moment by not making the connection that the Marvel movies start from the comic book.
It would make sense.
Yes, it does. And in typical gay fashion, they will make history by getting divorced within 2 years. In typical comic book fashion, it will be because secretly one of them was an evil super villain all along. And I vote for the villain. The Big Finish. A woman buys a chopping board with a penis on it. And she says, by mistake.
God, I hate it when that happens. Last time I went to Home Goods.
Girl, This does not look like an accident. Whoever sent her this chopping block fiercely knew there was a penis on it. This is not typical. Can you show the picture again? This is not typical of marble pattern. That is an uncircumcised penis on the block. And if I went to the Amazon website and tried to order it, you know they wouldn't send me that.
I think it's, I think it's some evil lesbian joke. Let's have a knife on the penis on the chopping block.
Cut it.
By the way, when I saw this story, and it is a story circulating today, it's real, production here at Q News Tonight did not provide me the Amazon page link I asked for me to buy this product. So like usual, they have failed me spectacularly.
Read.
The big finish. YouTubers, the Stokes twins, have been charged for so-called bank robbery pranks.
I'll tell you, if you watch what came out of New York State today, based off of the NRA, bank fraud is so in.
Totally 2020. I'm all for a good prank, but you really need to know where to draw the line. Anything with actual pain or injury, and in this case, breaking the law, not a good look.
I didn't realize you could try to rob a bank and then call it a prank. Well,
just kidding. It was a joke.
It was a joke. So when they were arrested, I suppose you can't call it a prank. I worry for America's future when I read headlines like this. Silly boys, you shouldn't have gone to school and graduated in 2014 from Trump University. The big finish. Happy birthday to legendary Lucille Ball.
I love this story. I have 3 Chihuahuas. 2 of them are Desi and Lucy, and I just love Lucille Ball.
Oh, happy over 100. I think it's 109 or
109.
Close, yeah. Happy 109th birthday to the great LGBTQ icon. She often defended our community and often said it was smart to recognize and choose what makes you happy. One of her most famous quotes is, quote, "It's perfectly all right with me. Some of my most gifted people I've ever met are homosexual. How can you knock it?"
Nice. Her role as Lucy Ricardo on I Love Lucy made her that gay icon that Misty just talked about. A scrappy underdog, always fighting to prove herself. But more important to me was Desilu Studios. It was a famous television and movie studio of the 50s and 60s and was named after her husband and her, and they ran it. Meaning, as a woman in the 1950s, she was way ahead of the business world in acceptance curve of females being decision makers. It's another reason the LGBTQ community admires her. She would have been 109 today, but her legacy is going to live on for decades
Girl
to
power.
come. Exactly. In the big finish, on this day in 1945, the United States dropped a nuclear bomb on Hiroshima, Japan.
Well, it was said in 2016, and we can say it again in 2020. A man that you can bait with a tweet is not a man that you can trust with nuclear codes.
Well said. You know, when we got this story, I couldn't think of anything positive or anything negative to say, but thinking about one thing, I hate war, and the only thing I can say about this is that this bomb did end that war.
The nuclear bomb that forever changed how war was fought killed about 140,000 people in Hiroshima. By the way, America, that's 20,000 less than COVID-19 has killed in America as of today. I could say Donald Trump has dropped a nuclear bomb on America with his failed policies, but that wouldn't even begin to be going far enough.
And that's it. That is today's news for the LGBTQ community on the world's first daily LGBTQ evening news show. Tonight we bring your attention to health concerns that apply here in South Florida, but may be going on everywhere in America.
We close tonight's show with an incredible interview about our hospitals during COVID-19, our healthcare workers' safety, our patients' safety at a major healthcare system in South Florida, and our major hospital in the gayest place on planet Earth.
In COVID-19, America celebrates our healthcare workers, but Queer News Tonight wonders if we do as good a job supporting healthcare professionals as we should. We ask, are our healthcare workers really heroes? After all, you must cherish and protect your heroes. So tonight, we are going to air our entire interview with Terry B., RN in the Behavioral Health Unit at Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital. Yesterday, Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis held a press conference with the chairman of Broward Healthcare System here in Fort Lauderdale, holding them up for what was an outstanding job, according to the governor, doing what they were doing for healthcare workers and their patients. The interview we are going to show you now contradicts everything you heard from that press conference from our governor and chairman, and from the major healthcare system in the gayest place on planet Earth. We were shocked to learn how bad this situation is on the ground in Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital, and we believe LGBTQ America, you're going to agree with us. We warn you, the facts here are extremely disturbing for your safety. Watch this. Tonight we present a special report, COVID-19 Crisis. What are healthcare professionals facing in our hospitals? A whistleblower on mask, PPE, COVID-19 infections, and hospital deaths. Hazard pay, and what is happening to healthcare workers and their patients. This is an exclusive interview with Terry, RN Behavioral Health Unit worker at Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital. America celebrates our healthcare workers, but Queer News Tonight wonders if we do as good a job supporting healthcare professionals as we should. Are they really our heroes? Tonight we're going to introduce you to an RN whistleblower that will likely challenge what you think is going on in our hospitals and with our healthcare workers, and then hospital patients. This exclusive interview is with Terry B., RN, name has been changed, RN in the Behavioral Health Unit at Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital. This is one of South Florida's largest hospital systems and our flagship hospital in the gayest place on planet Earth. Good evening, Terry.
Good evening.
Well, Terry, first off, are you nervous in terms of having this conversation?
Yes. My colleagues, everyone wants this to be done. We feel it's a very important message. This isn't just me, this is several nurses, but it needs to be done. We need to save people and we need to protect patients and staff.
Well, let's jump right into it. I've read a lot about this, and you have been an RN since 2013, and now work in a special 48-bed unit at Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital, one of South Florida's largest medical providers. Healthcare workers are a noble profession, never been challenged so much as they have been in this pandemic. What has it been like for you to work, first, before we get into the conversation, what's it been like for you to work in this pandemic?
It's been scary. It's been humbling. It's been isolating. I don't think any of my colleagues would say that they feel supported or safe at work. We hear platitudes and comments from corporate that they're protecting us and they value us, but the reality is we feel very isolated, very scared, and very alone.
You are a member of the LGBTQ community.
Yes.
I always like to say that, not making the assumption. Is there anything different in this pandemic for you as a nurse and a healthcare professional in dealing in COVID-19? Anything different as a gay man for you?
No, I think it's probably caused a level playing field for all of us. We're all terrified. I know we're going to talk about the outbreak on the unit. Very sadly, last week we lost a colleague to this. This is very real. Somebody I saw every time I went to shift came down in the outbreak. He was put on a vent, and very sadly, he died last week.
And vent meaning ventilator.
Ventilator, yes.
When the pandemic began in earnest early in the year, what was it like for you in the first months in February and March? What was your life like at Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital?
Terrifying. There were mixed messages all the time, which also came from the CDC, when we could wear masks, when we couldn't wear masks. We were told that we weren't allowed masks. We had to sign papers that it would be dismissal if we wore masks. Then 2 days later, the CDC changed their guidelines and we were allowed to wear paper masks. There's been no unifying policy, and there's been no protection for us, to protect us and for our patients.
Early in the pandemic, specifically in February, March, here at Q News Tonight, Queer News Tonight, we were finding our footing in terms of trying to provide, doing the best we could to provide accurate information. I provide the exact same challenge to to all medical institutions, but the one you specifically work at. And my question then is, was Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital in February and March ready for the pandemic in terms of testing, PPE, other supplies? Was it available to them early on in February and March?
No. I don't believe any institution was prepared. I have colleagues that work up at Yale, and I quickly checked with them, did they have the proper N95 masks? No one did. Throughout the country, we weren't prepared at all for this. No one saw this coming. It's a pretty hard task to prepare for this.
We have received a lot of reports from other people besides you that indicated, for the most part, that many health professionals were saying that the paper surgical masks were what was being distributed, and that was all that was available for months, and that staff would be receiving those, and when they would leave shifts from Broward Health Imperial Point, that they would be searched, and that they would finish a 12-hour shift and they would search when they leave. What was all of that about? What were they doing?
So we still only get those paper masks, even though there's been a death on the unit. I was in absolute disbelief the first time I was searched leaving the premise. I had done 12 and a half hours a shift, a long, grueling shift. I had been exposed to the unknown. I'd put myself at risk. And then to have the indignity of having my bag opened every single night, where I carry my stethoscope and my blood pressure cuff and my pulse ox. I bring those to work. All my supplies. Everyone was searched. Everyone.
Why were they doing this? I don't completely understand.
They were trying to ensure that they didn't lose any supplies, which was kind of ironic because we were short of supplies. We didn't have hand sanitizers. We didn't have enough gloves. We certainly didn't have masks. So they were searching people who couldn't take anything because we didn't have anything. It was very, very unsettling.
I've read on many of the blogs, many other health professionals, nurses, in some private blogs of conversations that are going on, that Broward Health staff had to sign a document that if you brought your own N95 mask into the hospital, you would be fired. Is that correct?
Yes. I was not there that day. A colleague sent it around to different staff members. That was reversed in 2 days, and then we were required to wear masks. I don't really fault Broward Health for that, although it was very disconcerting for nurses. It was really a failure of the CDC to lead, and there was no government leadership. I understand why they did this. There was a shortage of masks, and they were desperate to utilize the masks as effectively as possible. But not wearing a mask is insane. It's against all medical advice. It wasn't handled very well.
So to make sure that I understand this, what you're saying is you went for a period of time at Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital where masks were not required, or explain to me, I'm not quite clear what happened here.
Well, staff members wanted to bring masks in to protect themselves. it was issued that if you wore a mask, it was terms for termination, and then that policy was, I believe, revoked 2 days later.
And why did they do that? That's what I don't understand. What were they protecting for? Why would they threaten termination for you to bring an N95 mask into work?
I think they were probably trying to not panic the patients and to not alarm them unduly. It is a behavioral health unit. But it was throughout the hospital. It wasn't just on the behavioral health unit, it was throughout the hospital. That's the only rationale I can come up with. And they were trying to stretch out supplies as much as they possibly could.
When was the first outbreak? I know when we had our preliminary conversation, you were using the word outbreak as an RN, as a nurse. I'm thinking as coronavirus as being the outbreak that happened in China and the World Health Organization's announcement on December 31st. You didn't mean that, and it took me a little while to understand that. So in terms of outbreak, you mean a isolated incident of a breakout. When was the first outbreak you and other staff were exposed to at Broward Health?
The first one was in March, where a staff member became ill on shift. He was there. We're exposed to the off-going shift, a change of shift report. He was sent down to the emergency department where he was actually admitted for COVID-19. So there was an exposure, and all staff who had been exposed with direct exposure were notified, and they had to keep a journal of their temperature and their symptoms.
And so this is early in the pandemic, as it's affecting the United States and specifically in South Florida.
Yes.
Early on. So what was the testing protocol at that point? This is in March. Were you tested after that outbreak?
No. To my knowledge, no one was tested. We requested to be tested, but staff was not tested. And that was a continual question from various staff to management: when are we going to be tested? We need to keep our patients safe. As a nurse, the last thing you want to do is go into a unit and infect people. We certainly don't want to be infected, but we also don't want to bring it in.
Let me make sure that I understand what you've just said. The first outbreak that you were personally exposed to was in March, early in the pandemic.
Yes.
A healthcare professional at Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital becomes infected, goes to emergency service in the individual hospital. You have, and other staff members have exposure, but they would not test you even when health professionals for the hospital were asking to be tested.
Correct.
And what was their explanation as to why they wouldn't test you?
There was really no explanation. We were told that staff was not being tested at this point. And no other explanation other than it was just not protocol to test yet? As far as I'm aware, yes.
Yeah, okay. I understand in the hospital, as the spring went on after March, that if patients had a risk of exposure, they would be using the rapid test.
Correct.
That's correct. Okay, and I understand we've done at Queer News Tonight many stories about the rapid test and its reliability, and especially early on in the pandemic in terms of the rush of it. Did healthcare workers receive the rapid test also?
No. No one is admitted to the behavioral health unit without a negative rapid test, which has to be administered a few hours before they come up. But no staff staff weren't tested.
So they're using the rapid test early on to admit to the behavioral health unit, but they weren't using the exact same test on the staff members, the healthcare workers that are managing the unit.
Correct.
And was there explanation as to why they were doing that?
Not really. It was a great frustration among the staff because we all wanted to be tested. But if you didn't have the symptoms and you didn't have a high fever, and unless you went down to the ED like the one staff member who fell ill during shift, we were not tested.
Well, and interesting to me, again, because of how many times we've reported this at Queer News Tonight, I am post-coronavirus, have tested for antibodies. I was completely asymptomatic. So without testing, you wouldn't know if you were asymptomatic. And if you're a nurse on a floor and you're working and you're asymptomatic and you don't have masks, there seems to be a reasonable suggestion that you might have medical effect on other staff members, healthcare workers, and patients.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, well, Terry, that moves us to the spring, through the spring, and we move into the summer, 4th of July holiday. And this is the focus of what we want to talk about. Over July 4th holiday, I've read a lot about this in social media, in private boards and messaging, obviously none of the official sites. But over the 4th of July holiday, you had a major COVID-19 outbreak that closed your unit. You're a 49-bed unit, and it closed your unit with 11 members, healthcare workers, including 2 doctors testing positive for coronavirus. So 11 healthcare workers. A mental health tech named Frank De Palma was placed on a ventilator, which was one of the major issues that came out of July 4th. And I read that he, after being on the ventilator and being hospitalized, he actually died July 29th, and is the healthcare worker that you're talking about that really fundamentally changed yours and other nurses' perspective of how you wanted to vocalize, a whistleblower, in terms of what was going on at Broward Health Imperial Point. Tell us about that incident and what happened that 4th of July weekend.
Well, we knew various staff members had contracted the virus in addition to 2 doctors. So 11 staff members plus 2 doctors. We knew that some were doing well, some were asymptomatic, some really struggled. So one of my best friends on the unit, she contracted it and she really struggled for 3 weeks. But yet other people got it and seemed really asymptomatic. We learned early on that unfortunately Frank was having difficulty. We knew he was on events, and then sadly he passed. Devastating. And we're all in shock because we don't understand, what is it going to take to protect us and protect our patients? We've had a staff member die from this. I don't understand why we don't have N95 masks.
Well, and I want to get into that specific issue. So this event happened. The most logical response to this, what happened to the unit? I understand it went into a deep cleaning. The unit was closed. What happened? Give us a timeline of what happened after July 4th weekend and so many medical staff testing positive for COVID-19.
So this is just our floor, the behavioral health unit. It was closed. We're paid when we don't work from our PL time, our personal leave time, which we accrue, which is basically our vacation time. So the hospital has to close for deep cleaning, but yet the staff pays themselves by their vacation time. That was a very sore subject.
How long did that go on? I want to come back to personal leave in a minute, but how long was that?
It was just short of 2 weeks.
Yeah, so the staff that are in this special unit are basically quarantined, for the lack of a better word, for 2 weeks. And the payment that continues of your salary of any of the healthcare workers is through their own vacation time or personal leave.
Correct.
Okay, all right. I want to ask, before we get into that, because I want to explore that too, I want to talk about an obvious response to this breakout. 11 healthcare workers and 2 doctors, and somebody ultimately, a med tech healthcare worker ultimately dies. Obvious situation now beyond the mask, which we're going to talk about, is testing. What happened with testing both before the July 4th event and after the July 4th event?
So when it became clear that there was a major problem on the unit. The staff was tested. We were going to be tested originally every 2 days. That switched to every 3 days, and then it was every 4 days we were tested. I was tested maybe 5 times in the span of 2 weeks. Obviously, they were all negative. During the times that the staff was tested, some did become positive. Some seroconverted, and they then were off work.
They're being tested repeatedly, and eventually they test positive because of the repeated testing.
And then when the manager knew that he had enough staff available to work, the unit opened again and we started admitting patients.
And has the testing regimen continued since the return? That it has not continued.
No, I have not been tested since that initial period.
So Broward Health's Imperial Point Hospital's strategy to test every 2 days, then 3 days, then 4 days, and it continued to stretch the time. They proved that people continued, healthcare workers, to turn positive in the multiple tests that they were doing. So it would seem to conclude that you needed to continue to test and continue the process of testing, but the hospital stopped it.
This is also an issue with, although we admit our patients with a negative COVID test, if they're 10 days, if their length of stay is 10 days, they easily could test positive. They're tested if they need to be tested upon placement on discharge.
Well, it seems like it's putting patients at risk and healthcare workers in the hospital at risk if you don't have a rigorous testing procedure that's going on in the hospital.
This is why the nursing staff has been crying out for regular testing and regular PPE. We don't know when we're asymptomatic whether we have this, but if the staff has the proper PPE, then at least we're protecting the sanctity of the unit and we're being protected by a potential outbreak.
Okay, so I understand we're now a month post this major COVID outbreak. Up to July 4th, between the beginning of the pandemic in January, really, until the July 4th weekend, the 1st, 2nd of July, how many times were you tested at Imperial Point?
I believe the first time I was tested was on the 3rd of July, which was my last scheduled shift before the unit had to close. And I believe all working staff on that day went down to the Psych ED and we were tested.
Why did they test on July 3rd?
That was the first time they knew there was a problem, and that was obviously staff members were getting sick. They had patients that were getting sick, and then they started testing the staff.
Let me make sure that I've got this correct in terms of what you just told me. The first time you were tested is July 3rd, which is only after Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital knew that they had this outbreak taking place in your unit.
Correct.
So in January, February, March, April, May, and June, through 6 months of 2020, you were never tested a single time.
Correct.
You were never tested a single time.
Even though at one point, by their own admission, and I wasn't the only nurse or the only staff member, many of us were exposed.
If I was a patient at Broward Health Imperial Point, I would want to know the frequency of you being my nurse, of how often you were tested.
I don't blame you. I would want to know too.
Okay, all right, so we understand the 2 points. You begin to get tested on July 3rd. Because of this outbreak, they announced that they're going to test you every 2 days, then they changed it to 3, then they changed it to 4. Now they have stopped in terms of the testing, so you're still negative, but...
I assume.
Yes, you assume. When's the last time you were tested?
Well, the last test was before I went back to work. I must have gone back On the 22nd of July, so it was before the 20th of July, which was my birthday, which I knew. So maybe the 18th was the last time I...
Okay, so you're approaching 3 weeks of not having been tested for COVID-19.
Easily, yes.
Easily. Okay. All right. So they close your unit. They found this. You have this hotspot in the hospital of your unit. 11 healthcare workers, 2 doctors, 1 person, one healthcare worker, a med tech ultimately dies. You haven't been tested in 3 weeks. Certainly they have N95s in your hand by now because of this outbreak. Is that correct?
No, that is not correct. The Pyxis, which is our system, our electronic dispensing system, nurses go and use their fingerprint and pull meds. That was loaded with N95 masks, but we're not allowed to access those. I don't understand why they're in, other than for show, and the hospital policy from the last time I worked was you could access that with a doctor's order after a patient had been proven to be positive. Not when you suspect a patient's positive and you do the test, but after a confirmed test comes back positive, with a doctor's order, you can access a mask.
But the doctor's order is only for the patient, it's not for the healthcare worker.
Well, hopefully the doctor's order is for the staff to access the mask. But to my knowledge, none of those masks have ever been accessed.
And America, we're showing you a picture of this machine that is similar to what exists in the Broward Health's Imperial Point hospitals, the machines that Terry is referring to. Let me make sure that I'm clear of something you said earlier. So through this process, healthcare workers and nurses, even through this hotspot event for July 4th weekend, the testing process you went through, nurses there are requesting to be tested, and they're requesting N95 masks. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And I just want to echo, America, I'm reading this in private conversations that are going on, not official channels, but I'm reading a lot of this, and I want to make sure I understand.
So I have a colleague that is writing on Facebook begging for people to give this individual nurse a supply of N95s because she's terrified to go to work. She doesn't have a supply of N95 masks, which many of us don't, and she's reaching out on Facebook begging for people to provide N95s so she feels safe at work. And that's the reality for the majority of us. Some of us have access to N95 masks, but from my point of view, everyone should have it, including the mental health techs. They're in closer contact with the patients for longer. They're actually on the floor. So they're at greater risk and greater exposure than we are.
You know, LGBT America, I just want to connect the dots in terms of this conversation to you. We reported for weeks and weeks and weeks the president's comments with the vice president's comments that tests were widely available. He said in March, everybody that wanted a test was going to get a test. The tests are beautiful. Remember, the president said that in March. We are now in August, and we're hearing healthcare professionals can't get tested for COVID-19. The same with PPE equipment. We're watching reports all over the country about PPE equipment, what we're producing, how much access healthcare professionals have to PPE equipment, and we're assuming here we've reached out to Broward Health Imperial Point for comment on this in terms of their access to PPE equipment. Terry, I'm curious in terms of your return. How do you feel the next steps for N95 are going to be for healthcare workers at Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital? Do you think that they're coming? Has there been an indication or communication that the hospital is going to be able to solve their PPE problems? How are they communicating to healthcare workers what's happening?
There is no communication, hence why I'm on this program. I want to bring awareness, and I'm trying to protect myself, my patients, and my colleagues. It's not being written about. It's not being expressed. I look at the paper and the media, every week and hope that it will be addressed, but this desperately needs to be addressed.
You know, America, again, LGBT America, we're talking about the flagship healthcare system here in South Florida, in Broward County, Broward Health, multiple hospitals. This is the major medical system in the gayest place on planet Earth. And Terry is a member of our community as we talk about this. I want to move on to something else related to PPE that I've read extensively about in these blogs and comments, not the official channels, in nurses and other medical healthcare workers in hospitals, Broward Health, Imperial Point as an example. I understand that Broward Health is having a critical shortage going on in PPE beyond masking. I don't quite understand what the N95 issue is, but even gloves and wipes are in critical shortage at the hospital. Tell us about that and what your experience is.
The staff is very perplexed because we'll come to change of shift and we'll start our shift and there won't be wipes or there won't be gloves. They eventually appear, and please, this is not criticism of the managerial staff, but those desperate supplies aren't available to us always. Maybe there'll be a can of wipes for, a dispenser for the whole unit, and we share them. We just don't have the supplies we need, and we don't understand why. It doesn't make us able to protect ourselves or our patients.
Terry, we have talked so much in pandemic about the communication that comes from the Coronavirus Commission out of the White House, the leadership, and what we see in contradictory information from the CDC, the attacks on Dr. Fauci, in every possible way. What we hear from the governor of Florida in terms of how reporting is being done, all kinds of different stories about the mass confusion of correct information on COVID-19. I want to zero right in on Broward Health's communication. So these issues that you and other healthcare workers are reporting now of what's going on based on your experience of this event and the loss of this med tech at Imperial Point. How do you feel Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital is doing in sharing this kind of information clearly and quickly with the different units in the hospital? Yours was dramatically affected July 4th weekend in this very significant hotspot. How are they doing communicating that and other related issues that are going on in the hospital with all of the medical staff?
Before I went to the behavioral health unit, I worked for nursing administration, which meant that I worked on every single floor, so I know all the managers. On my last day of testing, I actually went in with my puppy. I got a puppy recently.
Sounds like you need one.
Thank God it was only one. And I saw two of the managers who, one is a very good friend and one is one I know very well. And they asked me why I was there. And I explained this was in the lobby where we were being called in to be tested. And I said, well, we're being tested. And they didn't seem to know anything about the outbreak on the 6th floor. And I was flabbergasted. I thought this is important information that needs to be shared, not to blame fingers, not to do any of that, but to let people know how volatile this is and how even with perfect precautions, this can happen. And it doesn't seem to be given out to people. I was told by a colleague who was working for another Broward hospital that he was told he couldn't work on the behavioral health unit because if he did, he would have to be quarantined for 14 days because they had an outbreak. That was never officially told to any of us. I just know that from a colleague that works on both units and the different hospitals. I would think that they would want to share this information, if nothing else, to alert the population and the public in general how dangerous this situation is.
Terry, I feel obliged to make the connection of the miscommunication that we talk about from our president and vice president, the commission, our government, et cetera, and so on. The same observation that we would make to management of any medical facility in a hospital. These concerns of the lack of transparency that you're talking about, does it concern you the effect it will have on your patients' health in your hospital?
Oh, absolutely. Our patients deserve the right to have us in the proper PPE to protect them the best we can, and also for the staff to be protected. I can't fathom why these decisions are being made. Obviously, hospitals are going to be hotspots. You have to take every precaution to ensure the safety of the staff and the safety of the patients.
Terry, let's take that a step farther in terms of the healthcare professionals in hospitals, medical institutions themselves. Back to your personal leave observation. I want to re-quantify what you said happened 4th of July. So this hotspot breaks out at Broward Health's Imperial Point Hospital. All of these medical workers, including doctors, are infected. Someone dies from the incident. All of the healthcare workers must basically self-quarantine for 14 days, and the way they continue to be paid is by using their personal leave days, vacation days, to be able to leave the hospital and self-quarantine. So these people are suspected to be exposed to COVID-19, must go through this quarantine, but they must pay for it themselves. Do I have this correct?
You have this correct, and what is a very sore point for some of our staff members who work per diem, they don't have PL, personal leave time. So they just don't get paid because the unit has to close because they're per diem staff.
Well, and this is happening all over America in all kinds of industries, but medical healthcare workers are directly on the front line. There are heroes in terms of what is happening in COVID-19. And at Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital, there's no protection other than you're taking your personal vacation days.
So it was explained because the CEO was challenged this week on the unit when he came up to speak about the loss that our floor had suffered. And a nurse asked specifically, when are we going to get hazard pay? And the explanation was, Broward Health allows us to take negative PL time, which we have to pay back. So we continue to get paid throughout the time, but we have to pay that back.
And who did that? Who made that statement?
The CEO.
So the CEO of Broward Health said you can take negative paid leave, which in essence means you can take a loan against your vacation days, but you must pay back the loan if you are pushed into quarantine because of your exposure of COVID-19. Do I have that right?
Correct. So I would go into negative PL time during my stay. I elected not to use that program to have negative PL, which would have to be paid back. And you would work and you would accumulate hours and eventually pay the bank back.
To our healthcare workers that are on the front lines, I've watched this for months and months. We've done so many good news stories in our segment called Good News at Q News tonight about healthcare workers. What is happening in the morale of nurses and other medical workers at Broward Health at Imperial Point Hospital in terms of that approach and that response, in terms of you working overtime or 12-hour shifts or putting yourself in frontline defense for the benefit of your patients? What is that doing to medical workers' morale?
Well, it's destroyed it. I personally told my manager rudely, probably, and I didn't mean to be rude, but I was being sincere when I said, if you're not going to provide N95 masks and you're not providing hazard pay, which is federally funded, so we don't understand why we're not getting hazard pay, doing overtime is a really tough sell for me. I'm not willing to put myself at risk for an extra shift. I just can't do it.
We're working on identifying exactly where the federal government is on this issue in supporting healthcare workers, hazard pay, emergency needs. We're going to report that extensively to you of the exact facts of what the federal government has done for employees. So we'll include that as a follow-up in our segment that we're talking about.
So another issue which affects staff on other floors, let's say the ICU, the loyal staff that's there, that's not getting hazard pay, that gets their regular salary, are next to somebody who's come in, a traveler who's maybe making $100 an hour. And that is also very hard to suffer and swallow, because the loyal employee that's there all the time gets no benefit. But yet the person who's willing to travel, and at expense, there's no doubt about that, is probably paid 3 times the amount that the employee who is loyal.
And the traveler, you mean a traveling nurse?
A traveling nurse, yes.
Yeah. So the traveling nurse is being paid substantially more money to come in because of need.
Yes.
And they're in better situations. I want to ask about your voice. You're really very brave in terms of telling this story and providing this information. We get to decide what we think about the information that you're telling, and other healthcare workers that are going to tell this story also. It comes down to whether you're valued. This issue is very centric to me in terms of how we view our healthcare workers as heroes, and how we're phrasing that, and how we're saying that in America. We all feel better because we're saying our healthcare workers are heroes, and I agree with that. But to be a hero, it starts with whether you're protected and whether you're being heard and listened to. I'm curious in terms of what your viewpoint of that observation that your observation would be to that. Are nurses and healthcare workers being paid attention to and their recommendations listened to by Broward Health and Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital?
Well, certainly the concerns and worries that I brought up have not been addressed, have not been focused on. They had the flimsy signs outside, which were just that, healthcare worker, hero, and all that, which is pretty hard to walk by when you're being searched, when you're leaving a 12-and-a-half-hour shift and you're exhausted and you've been at risk and been exposed to God what, and not having the PPE. Morale is not good. Nurses are very upset, they're very worried. Not just nurses, all the essential workers. The cleaners are having the same problems, the mental health techs are having the same things, the PCAs. All of us are scared.
What if you just serve lunch or dinner? You're in the hospital and you're just serving food and you're going into...
They're at risk too.
Yeah.
The cafeteria, there is social distancing in the cafeteria, and they have different strategies that they've employed where they had prepackaged food, and then they started cooking food, and that was packaged. So they do the best they can to limit it. But even going up in the elevator, 2 people, we're supposed to all have masks, but the elevators can't be cleaned every time somebody comes in and out of them. The reality is, it is a risky place for all of us.
Yeah, and like it's a front line of a battlefield in the military. Terry, this seems to contradict everything that we hear about the celebration of our healthcare workers as heroes. Well, we're not testing. We don't provide the correct PPE. We don't have masks. You're forbidden to have masks for a while. You move to paper masks. You're not allowed to have N95s. You're not paid hazard pay, and you must pay if you're exposed to COVID as a healthcare worker. If you have quarantine isolation of 14 days, you must pay for it yourself. That seems to contradict everything that we're hearing in the general population, the general public. Q News Tonight, Queer News Tonight, it seems to contradict that our healthcare workers are really the heroes that we keep saying that they are.
This is the reality of where I work in Imperial Point. One of my colleagues said, when she found out, she said, "Oh, so we're paying for the unit to be cleaned." That was her comment when she found out it was coming out of our personal leave time.
Terry, as an RN, and what you've seen and what your colleagues have seen at Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital, as a healthcare worker, you're on the front line. You're like the military in a battle or a war. I'm curious, are you afraid? Are you scared about what you're watching?
Oh, yeah. I have a supply of N95 masks. Now, when I say supply, I have 2 of them that I have in case I have to go help somebody who's sick. I've recently become a nurse practitioner, so if I have to go see somebody, if a friend is sick, I will put one of those on. If I think there's an outbreak on the unit, I will put it on. So I carry one at work all the time that's unused. But yes, we're scared every day. You know, doing simple things like the inventory count on the Pyxis. I had to do that 2 days running with somebody who was one of the 11 who was sick on the unit. And I said to him, I think you're sick. I think you have COVID. And he wasn't sure. And this isn't meant to have blame on him. But I was terrified to do the count. I was basically finding the wipes. I was putting masks on. I was cleaning everything that he touched. He didn't know he was positive, but that is the reality.
You know, Terry, as I hear you say that, first off, to all of our medical healthcare workers that are subjecting themselves to this for our benefit, we thank you. Our thanks are pale in comparison to get a mask, have the right PPE, test you frequently, protect our healthcare workers. You're taking tremendous risks because you're saying, I'm scared, I'm worried about my own health, and you're taking a tremendous risk doing this, that there'll be retribution against you and other nurses and medical workers, because that's what happens to whistleblowers, because that's what Donald Trump has taught us happens to whistleblowers. Have you thought about the possible consequences of you saying what's actually going on at Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital?
Yeah. So I'd like to think I'm popular among the nursing staff, probably not completely. But we talk, and various staff members have talked about reaching out to the media. I checked with my inner circle of the people to see if we had like-minded, and you know, the core of nurses that I spoke to, we agree completely on everything I've discussed. I fully expect that tomorrow's my first day back in a little while. I might be marched out of the building.
Well, we hope that that is not the case, because truth leads to positive change.
Yep.
And we can assure you, LGBT America, you're going to hear this story repeatedly. And I can't help but think, in using Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital, for whatever reason these decisions are being made, whatever the reason are, and you can speculate on those reasons, this story is being repeated in hospitals all over America. Mm-hmm. And it calls directly into question whether we think our healthcare workers are the heroes that are being held up as thank yous, not only in the United States, but all over the world. If there are heroes, we will treat them differently than this story that began at Broward Health Imperial Point Hospital, 4th of July weekend. Queer News Tonight and Gay Town Hall thank Terry B., registered nurse. As a whistleblower, it was very risky to say out loud what many healthcare workers may be afraid to say. We can assure you there are many more voices that are getting ready to say the exact same thing. Our healthcare workers and professionals are heroes, and we do thank them at Queer News Tonight and at Gay Town Hall in our LGBT community. But the best way to thank them is to provide federal, state, and local government leadership, which seems to be lacking. The PPE supplies they need, and the hazard pay that matches the risk that they are taking for all of this. This is going to continue to be discussed because it's critically important for everyone's health, including our healthcare workers. This has been a special report of Q News Tonight.